On the morning of May the 1st, 1982, Captain Carlos Moreno was flying into combat for the first time. He and his wingman were screeching towards their targets, a pair of Royal Navy Sea Harriers. The archipelago they were contesting was, to Captain Moreno, known as Las Malvinas, but you might know them better as the Falklands. The aerial duel about to unfold was the first of many, a frenzied fight for both survival and national pride over these remote, windswept islands. The British pilots needed to protect their carrier, her escorts and their landing force from marauding Argentine strike aircraft, but it wasn't going to be easy, as the Harriers were targeted constantly by Daggers and Mirage IIIs, with missiles, cannon shells and countermeasures filling the sky. So, who came out on top? Which combination of aircraft, training, weapons and tactics was superior? The best pilots on both sides flying the most capable fighter aircraft their countries could offer, with only one objective: get the other guy before he gets you. Welcome to Dogfight, 1982, Falklands Frenzy. After decades of negotiations, years of debate, and months of preparation, Argentine troops began their reconquest of the Falkland Islands on the 2nd of April 1982. The British government responded by immediately assembling and dispatching a carrier and amphibious task force to the South Atlantic to take them back. It took them the best part of 2 months to get there, so it gives me a little bit of time to explain the capabilities of the aircraft and missiles that are going to prove key to this bizarre aerial duel. The Argentine aircraft we are interested in are the Mirage IIIEA and the Dagger, two aircraft that are oft forgotten about when this conflict is discussed, but two aircraft that were integral to the air war. The Dassault Mirage IIIEA was a French design. The Mirage I, first flying in May 1956, was designed as a supersonic bomber interceptor, capable of Mach 1.3. However, the Mirage I was too small and too slow, and limited by a lack of onboard radar. The Mirage II attempted to remedy this by strapping on a pair of SEPR rocket motors, but they quickly realised this wasn't a good solution and went back to the drawing board, designing a larger, heavier, radar-equipped version. They incorporated a much more sophisticated Delta wingform using data from the Mirage I and the British Delta FD2, and applied the newfangled area rule to assure the new design would be able to attain higher speeds. For those unaware, the area rule is the solution to an issue many transonic and low supersonic jets were experiencing. Essentially, traditional aircraft designs had a fuselage of constant cross-sectional area, a cylinder. What this meant was that the cross-sectional area of the aircraft changed drastically as you reached the wings. Supersonic air did not like this and produced extra drag. The trick was to keep cross-sectional area as consistent as possible, which meant narrowing the fuselage at the point where the cross-section of the wings was largest. The Americans had this problem on the first prototypes of the F-102 Delta Dagger, but redesigned it for the production model, taking it from Mach 0.98 all the way up to Mach 1.22. It's evident on a lot of aircraft when you know what you're looking for, giving that Coke bottle sort of effect. Anyway, the Mirage III was a different beast entirely to its siblings. They increased the size, redesigned the fuselage and the Delta wings, and slapped a massive ATAR 101G engine into it that delivered 10,000 pounds of thrust. It first flew in November 1956, with the Mirage IIIA becoming one of the first aircraft to reach Mach 2 a couple of years later, and the Mirage IIIC, the production model, entering service in 1961. The Mirage, and this is important, was sold to Israel as the Mirage IIICJ, J for Juif or Jewish. They performed spectacularly in the 6-day war, amassing 50 kills for only 9 losses. It was an excellent all-weather air superiority fighter, but had poor range and unreliable avionics, especially its radar. Lengthening the fuselage allowed for more fuel and an improved radar to be carried, and expanded the aircraft's role into fighter-bomber and even nuclear strike. This was the Mirage IIIE, which were sold to Argentina as the Mirage IIIEA. The Dagger is a bit of a strange story. Essentially, Israel inquired about creating an even more advanced version of the Mirage V. The combat in the Middle East made the all-weather features and advanced radar of the Mirage III redundant, and Israel instead wanted more ordnance capacity and longer range. But then, following their 1968 raid on Lebanon, which seems more relevant now than it should be, Charles de Gaulle imposed an arms embargo on the warring factions of the Middle East. This meant no Mirage 5s, and no more support for the existing Mirage III fleet. Israel would have to do it themselves. But they did have help. Dassault were equally unhappy with the embargo. Marcel Dassault, the company's founder, came from a Jewish family and sympathised with the Israeli cause. There was also a lot of frustration around a 100 aircraft sale to Libya just 2 years later, which apparently was outside the embargo. Anyway, Dassault sold Israel Aerospace Industries the license for the Mirage 5 and secretly supplied IAI with tools, jigs, components, and allegedly even 2 complete airframes. What they couldn't supply was an engine, as Snecma was a French government-owned company. Luckily, Israeli agents found someone in the Swiss aerospace industry willing to give them the plans for the ATAR engine, 200,000 blueprints for $250,000. Israel's Mirage 5J copies were named Neschers, meaning vulture, and only differed from the actual Mirage 5 in their Martin Baker ejection seats. These aircraft were phased out in the late 1970s, with 39 Neschers being sold to Argentina. Starting in 1978, they will be operated as the Dagger in Argentine service. We'll get onto the armament in a bit, I promise. For now, let's go across the Atlantic to see what those strange British guys are doing.
What is that? What the fuck is that?
That is a Hawker Siddeley P1127, a proof-of-concept V-stall aircraft built around a Pegasus jet engine that directs thrust out of 4 rotating nozzles on the side of the jet to enable it to hover, land, and take off vertically. The first 6 prototypes were built and tested in the 1960s, with 9 Kestrel FGA Mark Is flying 1,367 sorties at the cost of only 1 aircraft lost. It was clear this new type of aircraft wasn't the death trap it appeared to be. In 1965, a Kestrel was given a 19,000 pound thrust Pegasus 6 engine and put through its paces as the Harrier, first flying in March 1966. But we don't really care about the Harrier. We care about the Sea Harrier, or the Char. The RAF P1127s, Kestrels and Harriers had already been operated from HMS Ark Royal, HMS Eagle and HMS Bulwark by 1970. It was clear that adapting the Harrier for Royal Navy use was the obvious move, and a requirement was drawn up in 1971. It would be asked to conduct air defence, reconnaissance and maritime strike, so it needed some serious adapting. First, all components made from magnesium or other corrosion-prone materials were replaced with aluminium. To become an air superiority fighter, the pilot would need 360-degree vision, which meant raising the cockpit of the Harrier some 11 inches. It would also need a radar, which was added in the pointy nose cone. Its main target was the Soviet Tu-95 maritime recon aircraft, which would designate British ships as targets for Tu-22K blinders and Tu-22M backfires. The Sea Harrier had no chance of catching these supersonic bombers in their attack runs, so the mission was to kill the Tu-95, blinding the Tu-22s. And because the Tu-95 was massive and propeller powered, it had a massive radar signature, so the Char only required a small sea spray radar. I can't see that being a problem later on. In 1975, a contract was signed for 24 Sea Harrier FRS-1s, expanding to 34 by the time the first aircraft arrived in 1979, and the Navy was ready for them. HMS Invincible had been launched in 1977, and HMS Hermes had also been modified with the iconic 12-degree ski jump for Harrier operations, just in time. The British carrier Taskforce entered the 200-mile exclusion zone around the Falkland Islands on the 1st of May 1982. At the centre were Hermes and Invincible, the Royal Navy's only carriers. Hermes was nearly 40 years old, but she was large, and thanks to her upgrades she was able to operate 12 Sea Harriers along with 4 RAF Harrier GR3s for ground attack. Invincible was a lot smaller and only boasted 8 Sea Harriers, bringing the British total to 20 Sea Harriers and 4 GR3s. The Harriers and their carriers required barriers. They needed protected. Operating close to the carriers were the goalkeeper ships, Type 22 frigates HMS Brilliant and HMS Broadsword, and Leander-class frigate HMS Andromeda, all armed with the close-range Sea Wolf missile system. A series of destroyers and frigates operated in layers around the carriers, with their near-obsolete Sea Cat and Sea Slug air defense missiles. Only a small number of ships were equipped with a newer and longer-range Sea Dart. The most important vessels were the trio of Type 42 air defense destroyers, HMS Sheffield, HMS Glasgow, and HMS Coventry, equipped with long-range radar systems and bristling with surface-to-air missiles. The only thing operating farther out than the Type 42s would be the Sea Harriers themselves, on Close Air Patrol, or CAP. Usually launched in pairs, the Showers would orbit the carriers, responding to any intruders that were picked up on the radars of the Type 42s below. So, in the red corner, 24 Harriers and a whole lot of surface-to-air missiles of varying vintage. In the blue corner, a lot of aircraft. Operating from 5 Argentine Air Force bases along the coast were 11 Mirage IIIEAs, 18 Daggers, 22 A4B and 11 A4C Skyhawks, and 8 Canberra medium bombers. The Argentine Navy had an aging fleet of A4Q Skyhawks, of which 8 were combat ready. These were to be replaced with 14 French Super Étendard strike fighters with Exocet missiles, but only 5 of each had been delivered before the war started, and France suspended all further exports. Following the sinking of the ARA General Belgrano, all carrier operations were abandoned, and these aircraft, as well as 6 MB339s, all operated from FAA bases on the mainland. So, as the air war began, it may seem shockingly one-sided. However, the distances that these Argentine aircraft were forced to fly meant that they were operating at the very limit of their range. The fighters tasked with engaging the British Harriers could stay on station for a shockingly short amount of time, even with drop tanks. Less than 5 minutes for the Mirages, and maybe 10 for the Daggers. This meant forward staging and close air support were almost impossible, and made it very much a game of shoot whatever you see first, rather than shoot the most lucrative or most important target.
And speaking of lucrative targets, how's the holiday shopping going? Short, polite sponsor read incoming. This year, Raycon are helping me to help you to find that special holiday gift for the important target in your life. Maybe you could get them something they'd use every day. Maybe a pair of Raycon's everyday earbuds. Chances are that most people in your life already have a set of earbuds, I know, but they could always use a backup. And after they use their Raycons, don't be surprised if their other pair quickly becomes the backup pair. The everyday earbuds have tens of thousands of 5-star reviews online, offering high-end features and premium build quality at less than half the price of other brands. The latest model offers active noise cancellation, 32-hour battery life, quick charging, multi-point connectivity, and even comes with loads of different tips to fit into the widest range of ears. December is my 4th month using these earbuds since Raycon was kind enough to send them to me for the first episode of this series, and have done me well ever since. It's nice to be able to sit and edit this, let's be honest, stupidly long video without having to hear my flatmates singing Christmas songs. What did we do before noise cancelling headphones? Anyway, Christmas is just over 2 weeks away. Go to buyraycon.com/RWF and get up to 25% off site-wide. That's right, up to 25% off everything at buyraycon.com/RWF. And don't worry, if your recipient doesn't love them or wants them in another colour, there's a 30-day happiness guarantee and returns are super easy. Just make sure to order by the 15th of December to make sure you get them in time for Christmas. So, what are you waiting for? Click that link below and Merry Christmas. Back to the Falklands. The air war kicked off at 4:46 AM on the 1st of May 1982, with 21 1,000-pound bombs landing on Stanley Field.
These had been dropped from Black Buck 1, the infamous Vulcan bomber that completed an 8,000-mile round trip just for this mission. In response, 2 Mirage IIIs were vectored to intercept from Rio Gallegos, each carrying a pair of French-made Matra R550 Magic air-to-air missiles. On this occasion the Mirages couldn't find the Vulcan, and their Magic 1 missiles remained on their rails, but it was a very capable weapon for 1982. The Magic 1 has a 13 kg splinter warhead and is capable of Mach 3, with its infrared seeker being able to track to 30 degrees either side and guiding the missile to make turns of up to 35 Gs. Unknown to the Mirage pilots, who were forced to return to base, there were already 4 Sea Harriers in the air flying cap over the islands in 2 pairs, being replaced with a different pair every 2 hours to refuel and providing a constant presence from about 6 am. At 7:48 am, 12 more Shars took off for a ground attack run, targeting air defences at Stanley Field and Goose Green. Above them, flying at high speed at 30,000 feet, were Toro Flight, a pair of FAA Daggers, each armed with 2 Rafael Harrier 2 missiles. These were essentially an Israeli copy of the AIM-9D Sidewinder, with a slightly different seeker and a larger warhead. It operated very similarly to the Magic 1, but was older and less capable. Anyway, the Argentine ground radar couldn't see the low-flying ground attack Harriers, but could see a pair of Cap Shars flying at 15,000 feet and vectored Toro Flight to intercept. HMS Glamorgan had spotted the Daggers on her scopes and warned the Cap Harriers. The Daggers, unable to find the Harriers and desperately short on fuel, were forced to turn for home without firing a shot. Meanwhile, the other Sea Harriers reached their targets at 8:23 am, dropping cluster bombs and 1,000-pound delayed action bombs before returning to base to rearm, this time with an air-to-air loadout that included a death ray. Well, that's what the engineers that designed it knew it as. It's better known as the AIM-9L, the Sidewinder 9 Lima. The 9L had been shaped by the American experience in Vietnam and was the first all-aspect Sidewinder. Previous Sidewinders, as well as missiles like the Harrier 2 and the Magic 1, were rear-aspect missiles. This meant that you had to be behind your target, usually within a cone of around 30 degrees, so the seeker could lock on to the heat of the engine exhaust. This meant you had to go to all of the hassle of getting behind your opponent and staying there. This was no longer the case. The AIM-9L could be fired from side-on, head-on, above or below, within reason of course. A US Air Force colonel once joked, "When China Lake invented the 9 Lima, I knew it was time to get out of the fighter business." The Mirage and Dagger pilots, unfortunately for them, were still very much in the fighter business. The Argentines were aware of the new missile, snapping this photo of a 9L armed Sea Harrier as it intercepted a Boeing 707. It's amusing to note here that the Brits, to make the 9L Harrier compatible, simply just filed away sections of their existing missile rails engineering. But during the first morning and early afternoon, convinced the British were about to conduct amphibious operations, a stream of Mirages, Daggers and A4s screamed across the islands, with Cap Harriers always tantalizingly close, but never engaging. Finally, at around 12:30, a pair of Sea Harriers came to the assistance of a Sea King helicopter being chased by a trio of T-34C Turbo Mentors. Following cries of "Harrier, Harrier" over their intercoms, the T-34s jettisoned their rocket and gun pods and bugged out, but the Harriers were soon forced to climb to engage a pair of aircraft that had been spotted far above them. As the Harriers turned to engage, they spotted the first air-to-air missiles fired during the conflict already flying towards them, allegedly a pair of Matra R530s, the larger, longer range, and far less reliable cousin of the Magic 1. The Sea Harriers managed to evade and return to base without retaliation. At around 4 PM, the main Argentine strike force launched. 6 Canberras, 12 Skyhawks, and 3 bomb-laden Daggers would be covered by 4 Mirages and 4 more Daggers. Dogfight time. Dardo Flight, the leading pair of Mirages, was picked up by HMS Glamorgan's radar about 125 miles out. Like clockwork, a Cap pair of Harriers were sent to intercept, with Flight Lieutenant Paul Barton and Lieutenant Steve Thomas at the controls. They used the powerful Pegasus engines behind them to accelerate rapidly to around 400 knots and climb to meet the attackers head-on. They were going to try a new hook tactic using the 9 Lima. Thomas took the lead, getting visual of FAA pilots Garcia Cueva and Perona in the Mirage IIIs from around 8 miles away, and they saw him as well, moving into a tight formation. Thomas tried to get a lock on the Mirages using his all-aspect AIM-9L, but the missile wouldn't acquire a target. The Magic 1 on the Mirages wouldn't be able to lock him head-on either, but each aircraft did still have a pair of 30mm cannons on board. Meanwhile, Barton, his wingman, was diving wide right, picking up speed and accelerating to 550 knots, but he wasn't escaping, he was the hook. Thomas turned to the right as he passed over the Mirage leader at just 30 meters separation, climbing as he passed Perona, who was also pulling up. The aircraft climbed and turned with each other, entering a vertical scissors only 100 meters apart as they wrestled to get into a firing position. Meanwhile, Barton was shedding speed rapidly, pulling a sustained 6G climbing turn to get around on the tail of Perona's Mirage. Suddenly he heard the telltale growl of his Sidewinder achieving lock, finding himself only 500 meters behind Perona, but the Mirage was still going at 500 knots and leaving him behind. It was now or never. He fired. The AIM-9L left its rail, paused, then screeched towards Perona's Mirage. 4 seconds later, the missile hit the port side of the aircraft, the resulting explosion engulfing the jet. When Perona realized that any chance of controlling his plane had long gone, he ejected, landing on the beach below. His wingman was now 2v1. Garcia Cuerva immediately executed a hard defensive turn, dipping into the cloud layer below. Thomas managed to lock onto him and fire, but the missile disappeared into the clouds with the Mirage, with no explosion. Garcia Cuerva was dangerously low on fuel and decided to land at Stanley, known to him as BAM Malvinas. He'd never make it down, being tragically fired upon, shot down and killed by the airfield's jumpy AAA gunners. Strangely, Thomas was still awarded the kill, the logic being that the Mirage would not have been able to take off again even if it had landed safely. As this dogfight had raged above them, the 3 Daggers of Torno Flight, flying below radar, had spotted their targets, the seemingly unprepared HMS Alacrity, HMS Glamorgan and HMS Arrow. The Daggers targeted a frigate apiece, each dropping 2 250kg bombs which narrowly missed the British ships, detonating underwater and causing minor hull damage to Alacrity and Glamorgan. Their 30mm cannons caused superficial damage, with 1 British sailor wounded. At the same time, a single Dagger, Rubio 3, flown by Lieutenant Jose Ardiles, was vectored to intercept a single target. This turned out to be another pair of Cap Harriers, who, after dodging a Chaffrier 2 fired far outside its range, shot another 9 Lima, destroying the Dagger and killing Ardiles. Torno Flight had escaped despite a 70-mile chase by some angry Sea Harriers, and an hour later it was time for the next stage of the Argentine strike, as 2 flights of Canberra bombers arrived on station. The first flight was engaged with a Sea Dart missile fired from HMS Brilliant, damaging 1 aircraft and forcing the flight to abandon their mission. The other flight was not so lucky, being pounced upon by a flight of Shars. Lieutenant Alan Curtis fired both his Sidewinders into Canberra B-110, destroying the bomber and killing both pilots, who ejected but did not survive. At the end of this engagement on May the 1st, the Sea Harriers had come out on top, shooting down a Mirage, a Dagger and a Canberra, with another Mirage destroyed in a tragic friendly fire incident. However, the fact that Torno Flight had been unopposed during their attack run was ominous. It's all well and good destroying the fighters, but protecting the ships is the Sea Harriers' mission. The Mirage wouldn't dogfight again, being relegated to high altitude decoys and feints to distract the Shars from the real threat. Low-level strikes from marauding Daggers. The Canberras were relegated to night bombing from this point on. As the British waited for their amphibious assault ships to arrive, the carriers closed in once again for a fresh round of airfield attacks, during which 1 Sea Harrier and its pilot were lost to ground fire. But this was not the only British loss on the 4th of May, as 2 Super Etendards closed the distance at low level, popping up to fire 2 Exocet anti-ship missiles, one of which flew into the side of Type 42 destroyer HMS Sheffield and blew a 1.2 meter hole in the hull. Sheffield would be consumed by the resulting fire and would later sink under tow. The Argentine pilots had been practicing this attack for weeks on their own Type 42s, so they knew the radar horizon, detection distances and reaction times for the ship's radar, as well as the optimal attack procedure to program into the missile. The 4 Sea Harriers flying Cap were powerless to stop them, and the Super Etendards escaped unscathed. To make matters worse and highlighting the weakness of the Shars' radar in poor weather conditions, 2 Sea Harriers would collide just 2 days later, killing both pilots. The Royal Navy would need to do better if they were going to protect the invasion force, which arrived May 20th into San Carlos water and began the risky process of landing troops. British surface ships moved into and around the amphibious force to provide local air defence, with air cover being provided by the recently reinforced Harriers. Another 8 Sea Harriers and 6 Harrier GR3s had arrived on the deck of Atlantic Conveyor, replacing the losses and then some. However, given the distance that the carriers were operating at, each capped pair would only have about 10 minutes on station. This meant, with Hermes and Invincible staggering their launches, San Carlos Water would have Sea Harriers around a third of the time. On the 21st of May, the Argentine strike aircraft returned with a vengeance. Between 10 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon, 4 waves of aircraft descended on the vulnerable invasion fleet. Wave 1 consisted of 11 Daggers, with 4 Mirages flying high as decoys. None were intercepted by British aircraft, all found their targets. HMS Antrim was struck by a 1,000-pound bomb that, while failing to explode, smashed through the ship and started fires. HMS Broadsword sustained heavy strafing, but as the Daggers turned for home, Lieutenant Pedro Bean's aircraft was shot down by a Seawolf SAM, with the lieutenant ejecting but unfortunately not surviving. Sea Harriers were vectored to intercept, but the Daggers easily dodged the slower British aircraft and their optimistic missile launches. Wave 2 consisted of 18 A4 Skyhawks. 2 bombs hit HMS Argonaut, not exploding but managing to ignite Seacat missiles on board and killing 2 sailors. Another 2 straddled HMS Ardent, again refusing to detonate. This time, however, there were Sea Harriers in the air. 2 A4C Skyhawks were brought down by Sidewinders fired by Lieutenant Commander Neil Thomas and Lieutenant Commander Mike Bissett. Wave 3 was another 10 Daggers. Spotted by radar on board HMS Brilliant, Sea Harriers raced to intercept, dropping out of the clouds and unleashing an AIM-9L into Libra 2. Lieutenant Luna ejected safely. The 3 remaining Daggers rapidly closed the distance with HMS Ardent. Ardent's Seacat system malfunctioned and a 1,000-pound bomb hit and detonated at the rear of the ship. Meanwhile, another flight of Daggers were lining up on a pair of Type 22 frigates. They dropped their bombs as a flurry of Seacats and Seawolf SAMs rose to meet them. Both the bombs and missiles missed. Above the ships, another flight of Daggers had just spotted oncoming Sea Harriers and jettisoned their bombs to engage. Lieutenant Commander Ward and our friend Lieutenant Steve Thomas locked into a duel with the Daggers, with Thomas managing to get a rear aspect shot off. The Sidewinder hit the aircraft and took it apart. I didn't see it go in, I was busy trying to get the other one. Thomas fired off another Sidewinder, this one missing close to the Dagger's port side, but detonating and damaging the jet enough for the pilot to eject. Meanwhile, Nigel Ward had manoeuvred behind another Dagger of Raton flight, loosing one of his missiles into the rear of the enemy aircraft. The final wave of attackers, 6 A4Q Skyhawks, was focused on the damaged HMS Ardent, dropping a series of bombs on the stricken vessel, at least 2 of which exploded inside the ship. Ardent sank 6 hours later. The Skyhawks didn't escape unscathed, however, with Lieutenant Morel and Lieutenant Leeming chasing down the first flight and releasing a barrage of missiles that destroyed all 3 A4s, killing one of the pilots. After the dust had settled on the 21st of May, 3 of the 6 ships tasked with defending San Carlos Water had been severely damaged, with one of them in the process of sinking. These ships had shot down 1 Dagger, with another 3 Daggers and 4 Skyhawks being destroyed by Sea Harriers. The attacks planned for the next day were called off due to bad weather. On the 23rd though, a flight of 4 A4s pierced through the clouds and the air defences to drop 2 1,000-pound bombs into the newly arrived HMS Antelope, both refusing to detonate but penetrating deep into the starboard side of the Type 21 frigate. Antelope fired 2 Seacat missiles, damaging one of the aircraft, while another was brought down by 20mm cannon fire, losing control and hitting Antelope's main mast. Later that evening, another Dagger was destroyed by a Sea Harrier interception. During damage control efforts, the stricken Antelope was brought into more sheltered waters, and 2 Royal Engineer bomb disposal men were brought aboard to try and disarm the Argentine bombs lodged deep within the ship. These efforts would end in disaster, with one of the 1,000-pound bombs detonating, killing 1 member of the bomb disposal team and maiming the other. The explosion tore Antelope apart, starting major fires which soon spread to the magazines. Antelope broke in 2 and sank slowly over the course of the next morning. The 24th of May saw renewed airstrikes despite mounting losses for the Argentinians. LSL Sir Lancelot was hit by another bomb, which luckily refused to detonate. Rapier batteries operating on the coast claimed another 2 Daggers, but most of the strike aircraft survived unscathed. Euroflight was not so fortunate. Picked up on HMS Coventry's radar, the trio of Daggers were intercepted by Sea Harriers. After a tight, high-G turn that the Dagger pilots could only dream of, Lieutenant Commander Andrew Old loosed 2 AIM-9Ls, the first slamming into Oro 3 and killing the pilot. Flight Leader Diaz, in Oro 1, saw his wingman explode and called out to warn his surviving ally, but it was too late. 2 kills for Old. His wingman, Flight Lieutenant David Smith, spotted Diaz banking hard right ahead of him and heard the growl of a Sidewinder in his headphones. Safety catch up and fire. A great flash and the Sidewinder leapt off the rail, humming straight at the target. Another flash and fireball. The Dagger broke up and impacted the ground in a huge burning inferno. In less than 5 seconds, we had destroyed 3 enemy aircraft, but with no time to reflect. Diaz and Puga fortunately both managed to eject safely and were rescued. Following this engagement, each of the 2 Argentine Dagger squadrons had been reduced to just 2 jets. The Skyhawk fleet was not faring better, with the combination of HMS Coventry and HMS Broadsword shooting down 3 of them on the 25th of May. This combination of a Type 42 and a Type 22 was known colloquially as a Type 64, allowing the long-range Sea Dart on Coventry to work in tandem with the short-range Sea Wolf on Broadsword. Incensed, another flight of Skyhawks returned that afternoon. They were too low for the Sea Dart, and evasive action from Coventry meant that Broadsword's Sea Wolf couldn't see the incoming Skyhawks. Coventry was struck by 3 bombs just above her waterline, 2 of which exploded. Coventry capsized within 20 minutes. That same day, 2 AM-39 exocets hit the side of the MV Atlantic conveyor, starting uncontrollable fires and destroying 8 of the 10 helicopters on board. Atlantic conveyor would sink 3 days later under tow. Sea Harriers were too slow to respond to any of the attacks on the 25th of May, and all enemy aircraft escaped unscathed. The next notable strike was almost 2 weeks later on the 8th of June, with 5 Daggers hitting the isolated HMS Plymouth with 4 bombs, again all failing to detonate, but Plymouth was heavily damaged regardless, and developed a list. Showers were vectored in on a hopeless intercept, leaving LSLs Sir Galahad and Sir Tristram vulnerable to a group of 5 Skyhawks, setting both on fire and killing 50 men. 4 more Skyhawks came in to make it even worse, destroying a landing craft and killing another 5 troops before 2 Sea Harriers delivered swift retribution, destroying 3 of the attackers with no survivors. The hulks of these aircraft sank into the sea next to the burning, doomed LSLs, poignantly marking the end of the air war over the Falkland Islands before the surrender of Argentine forces just 6 days later. The British very famously won the war, that much is evident. But who won the air war? It would be easy to point to the Sea Harriers' combat record and draw a simple conclusion. The Harriers shot down 21 enemy aircraft, 1 Mirage IIIEA, 9 Daggers, 3 A4Bs, 2 A4Cs, 3 A4Qs, 1 Percara, 1 Canberra, and a C-130. While 6 Sea Harriers were lost to accidents and ground fire, none were destroyed by enemy fighters, so 21 kills for 0 losses is an obvious win, right? The Harriers were there to protect the ships, the ground forces, and the helicopters supplying both. Of the 24 effective strike missions flown against Royal Navy ships, Sea Harriers only intercepted 5 of these during ingress, just over 20%. Another 9 kills were achieved during the enemy attack runs, and 7 were shot down after the aircraft had already completed their attack. This unhappy ratio resulted in 6 Royal Navy ships never returning home, and another 12 receiving significant damage. Despite the advantage the Harriers had in manoeuvring and accelerating, they were still chronically subsonic, limiting the maximum range of their sidewinders and making drawn-out chases a futile affair. The Royal Navy's lack of an airborne early warning aircraft, or even any aircraft with a reliable look-down radar, made intercepting these low-level, high-speed attacks almost impossible, relying on the ship's radars to guide the Harriers to their targets. The Super Etendard threat was another massive problem. It was a blessing for the Royal Navy that the Argentine pilots only had 5 Exocet missiles at their disposal, because the Harriers had no chance of seeing, intercepting, or destroying these aircraft as they skimmed above the waves at near supersonic speeds. However, those high-speed, low-altitude attack runs that made the Argentine jets almost invisible to the British radars also significantly hindered their own effectiveness. Due to the very short time these bombs were in the air, they rarely had long enough to arm, and despite the bravery and impressive accuracy of the Argentine pilots, only a third of their bomb hits actually detonated. In true YouTube fashion, maybe it's fair to say there was no out-and-out winner. The Sea Harrier was a superior dogfighter with superior missiles and emerged with an impressive kill ratio. The Sea Harrier pilots were let down by the fact that they could not reliably find or intercept the faster Argentine jets, who rapidly adopted and refined new tactics to inflict maximum damage onto the British invasion force at great risk to themselves and their aircraft. It goes without saying that a lot of very brave, very skilled pilots flew these missions on both sides, many of whom never made it home. Following the war, both sides sought to remedy their issues. The FAA secured more Mirage IIIs as well as Mirage IVs from Peru, and upgraded their Daggers with IAI Kafir standard avionics, making them fingers. The Argentine Mirages would keep flying until 2016. BAE also addressed some of the more glaring weaknesses of the Sea Harrier, including a much more advanced radar with look-down capability. The new aircraft could mount the AIM-120 AMRAAM, had a chaff dispenser, and an increased thrust Pegasus 11 engine. This was the Sea Harrier FA-2, and entered service in October of 1994, fighting in the Balkans. The Sea Harriers were eventually retired in 2010. Harriers in the Balkans and Mirages in the Six-Day War are just 2 possible episodes of this series. Please do comment if you have an idea for a future episode of Dogfight. I'm always interested to see what you think. And thank you very much for watching. Do consider watching the first Dogfight episode if you enjoyed, and make sure to subscribe to see the next one. And thank you to these lovely people for supporting me on Patreon. You're really the best. Anyway, I'll see you all next time.